Alright, guys, so let's read chapter 15, 16, and 17 now and see what happens if they actually find Naomi's father. Chapter 15 is called A Piteousness of Doves. Fabiola hung up the phone and shook her head and frowned. It had been 3 days since we'd been to Aunt Teresa's, and still Santiago had not arrived. Teresa, she feels confident that he still might come for the holidays, possibly for the new year. I will take Owen and Ruben to the municipal building and check the registration list this morning, said Bernardo. Well, I guess that is that, said Graham, looking into her plate of eggs. Graham, he still might come. I scooted my chair away from the table and walked outside to the jacaranda tree and sat down. Tonight was Barrio Jalatlaco's posada, and tomorrow the radishes would be delivered. Where was Santiago? What could have happened? He was going to miss everything, including us. I stayed beneath the tree while Bernardo left with the boys and Graham, Fabiola, and Flora left for el mercado. A breeze lifted the loose purple jacaranda blossoms and sprinkled them over me. Picking up a bar of soap, I held it against the sky and imagined a little white dove inside. I rounded the corners of the bar and smoothed the arch that would be the back. I thought of Blanca. I wondered what she was doing and if she missed me. I thought about Mr. Marble and Mrs. Marimoto. If I didn't find my father, would I have to go live in Las Vegas and leave my life in Lemon Tree? I worked and whittled, scraped and dug, but when I got to the center, there was nothing there. Only the ground covered with my snowy frustrations. So she wasn't even able to carve. I whispered to the leaves and the purple flowers, Santiago, you don't have to be our father if you don't want to. Just show up and help me, please. As I picked up another bar of soap to begin again, the gate opened and no one walked toward me, with Ruben following. It's okay, Naomi, it's okay. Had Santiago registered at the municipal building? But when Bernardo walked into the yard behind the boys and I saw his sad, soft-hearted eyes, I knew that Owen had only been trying to reassure me there was no good news to give. That night, before Las Posadas, Graciela brushed my hair until it shimmered like velvet. Since I'd been thinking so much about my father, I wondered about Rubens. Graham would say to let it be and mind my own affairs. Blanca would tell me to ask lots of questions and get lots of answers. Graciela, ¿dónde está Rubens' father? She stopped brushing. I hoped that hadn't been too rude or nosy. We're no longer together. Did you ever want to leave Ruben with Flora and Pedro and go look for your life? Graciela turned me around to face her. She carefully situated a beaded headband in my hair. No, Naomi. You see, I am looking for my own life right here with Ruben. At 8, when the sky was filled with darkness, we all walked the few blocks through the barrio to a small hotel for Las Posadas. Many of the neighbors gathered there in the street, as well as tourists who were staying at the hotels. Flora and Pedro and Graciela seemed to know almost everyone. In just a matter of minutes, the road filled with people. The door to the inn opened and a handsome man with black hair and a beard walked out into the street with his 2 teenage daughters, their arms full of baskets. Look, said Fabiola, he has las candelas, the torches. The father gave the adults the long sticks of bamboo with a candle stuck in the top, surrounded by an upside-down cellophane umbrella. One daughter handed me long wire sparklers at least 3 feet long, then passed whistles to the youngest children. The other daughter gave firecrackers to the boys. Owen held up a bundle of pink and white firecrackers to show me, grinning and jumping up and down. Ruben copied him. The man and his daughters lit the wicks of las candelas, and then everyone passed the flames, candle to candle, until the street glowed with soft lights. One of the older boys held a candle, and the younger ones ran to it and lit their firecrackers, tossing them quickly away from the crowd. Pop, pop, crack! The huddle of people began walking slowly through the street. Every person from the smallest to the oldest held a sparkler, candle, or firecracker to light the night. I held my sparkler out and watched the tiny white pinpoints sprinkle onto the street. The sound of the firecrackers echoed off the stone streets and brick walls. People wove like a snake on the cobblestones, then stopped at the first door and started to sing. It is a famous song about this night, whispered Fabiola. It says, the Queen of Heaven is asking for shelter for only one night under your roof. On the other side of the door, someone answered them. I looked up at Fabiola, surprised. She nodded. The people wait behind the door. They say, no hay posada, there is no shelter here. Watch, said Graciela. The people who turned us away will come out of the house and join us. As I peeked back through the crowd, the door opened and a man and a woman stepped out. Another neighbor passed them some candles which they lit. Then the parade started again. As I walked, my sparkler spilled a circle of brightness in front of me. Graham had a bamboo candelero, and when I glanced up at her in that light, her face looked soft and contented. She hummed along with the singers even though she didn't know the words. The song continued and people's voices became stronger, floating upward and echoing off the walls at the barrio. At each house, it was as if part of me knocked on the door too, asking about my father and getting no answers. Spurts of light and noise surrounded me. I felt tears in my eyes and wiped away the drops on my lashes. We stopped at another door, and the people's voices sang louder. Again, someone from behind the door called back to them, "No hay posada." The procession circled the block and stopped in front of the inn where we had begun. The father, who had passed out Los Candeleros, knocked on his own door and sang out the words of the song. A woman's voice sang back. Graciela whispered, "Come in, holy pilgrims. Welcome to this place. Although this house is modest, our heart is big." Everyone cheered loudly, and the boys threw an army of firecrackers, the noise pepping the street. My tears spilled over. Graciela hugged me. "It is a joy and a sadness in the heart at the same time, no?" I nodded. No wonder my father loved Las Posadas. Then, as quickly as my tears had come, the mood around us changed. The doors flung open, and several women came out with trays of sandwiches that Fabiola called tortas. The daughters served punch from a big pot. On a nearby rooftop, I noticed a boy swing a rope back and forth and then let go. Another boy on a rooftop on the other side of the street caught it, and as he pulled, a piñata slowly rose from the ground. Someone held up a stick, and the crowd clapped and cheered. Even the youngest children received a turn tapping at the piñata. Owen swung and got a good crack. When everyone whooped for him, he bowed, and the people laughed, but not making fun like in Lemon Tree. When the bigger boys took their turns and the piñata broke, Owen ran in with the rest and came back to me with his hands full of something that looked like short sticks of bamboo. "Sugar cane," said Graciela. She took the thick cane, peeled back the top like a banana, and handed a piece to Owen and another to me. "Taste it." Owen ran off with the sugar cane dangling from his mouth like a cigar. I carefully put the white bark to my lips and sucked on the sweetness. One after the other, the pottery insides of the 5 piñatas clattered onto the street, and little children ran to collect the peanuts, small oranges, and sugar cane that spilled from their clay tummies. The women passed out orange, pink, and yellow tissue paper bundles to each person. Then people began to drift away in 2s and 3s back to their own parts of the neighborhood. As they left, they called out, "Feliz Navidad!" We headed home too. Flora, Graham, and Fabiola walked arm in arm ahead of me, 3 links in a chain. Bernardo and Pedro walked behind us, talking in their deep Spanish voices, probably about the radishes that would be delivered from the fields tomorrow. Ruben and Owen on one side of me already nibbled the cookies and candy that had been inside the tissue bundles. On the other side, Graciela held my hand. Every few minutes she looked down at me and smiled with a face full of kindness. Just for a blink of my eye, I pretended that Graciela was my mother. I wondered if my father had ever married again. Maybe he would show up and he would meet Graciela and they could get married. Then Owen, Graham, and I could live with them in a little house like Flora and Pedro's, with Fabiola and Bernardo close by. I would never have to go back to Lemon Tree and take the chance of having to live with Skyla. Every year we could all walk home from Las Posadas together, one big family. We turned the corner and the street lamp gave off enough light so that we could see a lone figure up ahead standing in front of the wooden gates. "I told Benny to come over so we can make the decisions tonight," said Bernardo. Pedro waved and the person waved back. As we walked closer, I thought, what if it isn't Benny? What if it's my father? But it wasn't. It was just Benny. Everyone went to bed except for the men, who huddled together in the yard and discussed what they would carve for the festival. With my box of carvings under my arm, I tiptoed into Flora's kitchen for the last of the hot chocolate, which I knew was on the back of the stove. As I sipped, I examined a jacaranda branch that Ruben had dragged inside and left on Flora's table. I picked up the branch and held it above my animals. I moved the branch back and forth like a puppeteer and imagined what my father had once carved for us. Then I held the branch upright as if it grew out of the table. Since it was flat on the bottom, it balanced and stood like a young sapling. I braced it with Flora's salt and pepper shakers and bottles of hot sauce for extra support, then carefully began placing my soap figures among the spindly twigs. Benny walked in, and while he drank a glass of water, he glanced at my arrangements on the table. He came closer, studying the animals in the tree. Don't touch, he said. Then he ran outside. Chapter 16. A Team of Horses. "Finalmente," said Fabiola as I walked into the kitchen for breakfast. "They would not tell us what they decided to carve until you got here." She turned back to the stove to flip a tortilla and on what Graham called the black trivet. "We wait until everyone is here," said Bernardo. Pedro winked at me. Here's the rest of us, said Gram, with Owen and Ruben right behind her. My carvings were all over the table. Bernardo scooted his chair and pulled another chair over so I could sit between him and Pedro. ¿Qué? Said Flora. What? Tell us. Bernardo started talking fast and excited in Spanish, and Pedro nodded. Then Pedro stood up and paced around the kitchen, describing something and using his hands to express his excitement, waving them around. All this made his big belly dance. Fabiola translated, a gigantic branch like a big tree. Instead of leaves, there will be pigs and birds and fish and crocodiles. The panther lying here and an elephant sleeping there, little parades, giraffes and monkeys all together. Pedro sat back down and reached over and hugged my shoulder. And on the top, continued Fabiola, un león, the king of beasts. It will be maravilloso, wonderful. I was definitely going to add maravilloso to the superb Spanish word list. Shh, shh, the neighbors, they could hear, said Pedro, putting his finger to his mustache. People are jealous and could steal our ideas. Naomi, you can come to the market with me or stay and carve with these crazy men all day, said Graciela. I knew she was kidding. Aquí, I said, here. Graciela rolled her eyes. Bueno, como quieras, as you wish. She pulled the shade on the back door before she walked out. A few minutes later, Benny arrived. He backed a truck into the yard and unloaded tubs filled with twisted and gnarled, knotty, and contorted red vegetables that didn't resemble any delicate little radish that came from Gram's garden. Gram stood over them with her hands over her hips. I have never seen anything like them in my life. Why, they look like giant overgrown yams that went through a pretzel maker. I think some of these are as tall as Owen. Bernardo, Pedro, and Benny each dragged a big tub of radishes into Flora's kitchen. Owen and Ruben had the job of misting the radishes with water so they would not dry out. They both took this duty seriously and sat on the floor with their water bottles ready, waiting for the first cut to be made. Bernardo grinned at me and rubbed his hands together in anticipation. Then he picked up a knife and started to carve. What happens to these radishes after the festival? Asked Ram. After the judging, each booth gives away the dolls and characters. It is good luck to have one of them on your table for your Christmas feast, but soon they dry up and must be thrown away. All that work, and they only last a few days, said Gram, shaking her head. But of course, said Bernardo, it is for the joy of doing it, of participating, and for the prize if you win. The men's fingers were nimble, and I was amazed. They didn't cut themselves. They twisted and turned the radishes as if they were on spools, making impressions that often left the radish with a face of a remarkable feature, like an elephant's knee in a knotty whirl. Outside, the radishes were dark and brownish red. As the men scraped off the layers of skin, they revealed true red, the palest pinks, and in the heart of the radish, white. But the white was tainted, as if someone had tried to bleach a pink blouse, and around the edges of the seams, the faintest trace of rosy color remained. I watched the men make magic out of vegetable and copied them. The radishes cut like potatoes, only firmer, and gave way much easier than soap, which meant I made more mistakes. Benny said I could carve anything I liked, as long as it was an animal. I made little elephants, doves, bears, and squirrels, sticking at first to things I'd carved before. At the end of the day, we covered the radishes with damp towels and set them in coolers. The next day, it was the same. We worked for hours, laughing and talking and singing songs in Spanish. I didn't even care that I didn't know all the words. Fabiola, Gram, and Flora made food and lemonade. And when Owen and Ruben's excitement could not be contained, Graciela took them away to find lucky spiders. On the last day of the carving, Benny brought in a radish that looked like a giant bulb. What will you do with that? I asked. It is for the crown, the lion. We want you to carve it, to thank you for the idea. I looked at Pedro and Bernardo, and they nodded. I took the radish from Benny, knowing that this was an honor. I held it up and examined it. The lion could be sitting facing us with the front legs straight and resting on its back legs. That way, I could carve the entire mane in a giant jagged circle. Yes, said Benny, perfecto. I studied the radish again and made a few careful cuts. If I scraped a very thin layer of red in a long line, it curled slightly. I could get a curly mane on El León. León? Thinking the name reminded me of the tiny thread of hope to which I clung. If my father came to the festival, would he see the radish tree full of animals and remember what he'd carved for us all those years ago? Would it make him happy? Would he like to know that his daughter was a carver too? Today's the day, I whispered to Gram on the morning of the night of the radishes, waking her from sound asleep. I had already dressed in my peasant blouse, jeans, and huaraches. Gram sat up and pulled the light blanket around herself. Naomi, what time is it? Early, but I couldn't sleep. Gram ran her hands through her thin hair and cleared her throat. There's something I want to say to you before you get going. I sat down next to her. Gram, everything will be fine. Now let me talk. Lately, practical matters seem to be closing in on me. Like what? Skyla might be right about a judge not wanting to separate a natural mother and her child, even after all the bad she's done. While I've been here, I have come to the conclusion that maybe I should be preparing you for that situation, just on the slim notion it might happen. I don't know how I would ever get along without you, but I'm more concerned with how you would get on without Owen and me. But it will not come to that, I said firmly. Let's just plan that in our brains. Gram laughed. I am pleased you have adopted my positive attitudes, but even if we do find your father, I'm just not sure what kind of cake this mess will turn out to be. What if he wants you and Owen for himself? What if he wants you children to stay here with him? Then what? Then you'll have to stay with us, I said, kissing her on the cheek, and you'll have to learn some more Spanish. After lunch, with Pedro, Bernardo, and Benny in the front seat and Owen, Ruben, and me crowded in the back, we rode in the truck to the center of Oaxaca City. Behind us, in the truck bed, the coolers held the mysterious radishes. We unloaded the coolers and tubs of supplies on a corner, and Bernardo drove the truck back to Barrio Jalaco. He would walk the 13 blocks back to the town square with the women. We looked like a caravan of horses plowing through a field of tourists, our arms full of supplies, coolers, a metal wash tub filled with radish leaves, bags with extra knives, for last-minute tweaks, a big plastic bowl filled with moss, which we could use as a carpet for the scene. After finding our assigned table, the boys and I waited while the men checked in with the officials. El Zócalo was a square park bordered with large trees, corralled in fancy black iron fences. Their wide branches created deep shade. In the middle of the park, a fountain bubbled, and manicured hedges protected the flower beds dotted with blooms, yellow, red, orange, and white, like the rainbow of colors in the fruit vendor's stall at El Mercado. Next to the street, long tables had been set up for the festivities, surrounding the entire park for a block in each direction. In front of the tables, a raised wooden viewing platform ran alongside, with a metal railing to keep those Graham called the looky-loos a reasonable distance back. Like a frame inside a frame inside a frame, the trees, tables, and viewing platforms boxed the entire park, with openings now and then through which people could pass. El Zócalo blazed with colorful paper flags and giant balloon bouquets. I looked at every man who passed on the street. Our father could be any of them. He could even be a man pretending to be our father, and I wouldn't know the difference, would I? Benny, Pedro, and I spread the moss on the table. Owen and Ruben took their posts with the water bottles, waiting to spray something, anything. It wasn't long before Graciela, Flora, Fabiola, Graham, and Bernardo arrived. I looked up at Bernardo. I want to stay and help set up. It is more important that you are with Fabiola and the others to ask about your father, said Bernardo. All of the carving is done. I promise we will make it look beautiful. And then you will be surprised like all the other turistas. There is much for you to see as well. The judging wasn't until 5 o'clock, so we had time to start at the stall next to ours and walk slowly on the viewing platform around the entire park, along with hundreds of other people. The carvers added their final touches to their scenes and began to put out their secret best that they had held back until the last minute. I just can't believe that every detail of every figure has been made from a radish or some part of it, said Graham. It is true, said Fabiola. It is forbidden to use anything else. One year, someone used a carrot to carve a figure for color, and they were eliminated from the competition. I could hear the comments of the tourists as they stood near us. Remarkable, magnificent, unbelievable. And it was all those things. Dolls dressed in elaborate gowns, musicians with trumpets, nativity scenes with Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus, plus the sheep and camels and wise men. Bandits riding wild, rearing horses, tall angels holding harps, Christ dying on a cross, school buses with children waving from the windows, a 5-foot cathedral with the saints carved into the walls, just like the giant cathedral nearby, all made from giant radishes. Fabiola or Graciela asked at each booth about our father. They found many who knew him well, but none who had seen him recently. With every person who shook their head, Graham's face nodded politely as if to say, "That's okay," but her eyes were telling me a different story. As we slowly inched closer to our own booth, I took Graham's hand and squeezed it. She looked at me, downhearted. "We're running out of time, Naomi." Chapter 17, An Exaltation of Starlings. "Look," said Graciela, "everyone is crowding around our table." It was true. We were almost back to our starting point, but we could hardly nudge our way to the front. One lady even turned around and said, "Wait your turn." I could see Bernardo, Pedro, and Benny's heads through the crowd, nodding and smiling. Finally, several people near the table moved, and I slipped through the railing. I had seen individual pieces, but I never could have imagined how it all connected. Radish upon radish upon radish had been bound together with thin roots to create the giant trunk and sprawling branches. Radish leaves burst from the top. Fish of every size and shape appeared to swim up the trunk. Panthers prowled across a limb. Crocodiles and lizards lounged on the lower branches. A tiny row of elephants walked, tails and trunks above them. Deer and sheep and cows snuggled together in the saddles where the branches met. Beetles and butterflies attached to the leaves. Tiny birds poked through the holes, their beaks open as if they were singing, and at the very top, my lion, the mane like a majestic sunburst. The complete and unabridged animal kingdom with over 200 photographs had come to roost in our tree. Ay, qué hermoso, said Flora. Yes, beautiful, said Fabiola. It looks as if Noah chose this tree instead of an ark, said Graham. Reuben and Owen gave an occasional dramatic squirt from their water bottles to keep the radishes moist. The judges, they're coming. Make room for them, said Fabiola. We moved off to one side as a group of men and women with clipboards studied the presentation and made important marks on their papers. Soon they moved to the next stall farther down, and the entire crowd shifted with them. Now what? I asked. We relax, said Benny. We have fun at the festival. It is a big party, too. We give away some of the figures to people who admire them, and then we wait for the announcements. The band concert lasted until well after dark, and then came the results of the judging. We all crowded together. A man at a microphone began announcing the different categories. The first was Categoría Tradicional, meaning nativities, cathedrals, and religious carvings. The speaker called the names for third, second, and first place, followed by cheers and applause from the crowd. We waited through 4 more announcements. Fabiola translated. Next is our division, Categoría Libre, free design, meaning carvings of any imagination. This year, the carvings have been extraordinary and compelling. Starting the third place and receiving a cash award and a commemorative certificate are the Perez brothers. We clapped politely and knew exactly where the Perez brothers were standing due to the rousing shouts on the other side of El Zócalo. And in second place, and receiving a cash award and a commemorative certificate, continued Fabiola, but she didn't need to continue because we heard the names. Bernardo Morales, Benny Morales, and Pedro Martinez. Second place, squealed Graciela. We have never ever been so honored. The men raised their arms in the air, jumped up and down, and clapped one another on the back, and we all cheered as loud as the Perez brothers. Benny picked me up and swirled me around, and when Pedro and Bernardo hugged me, I laughed. We heard the results for first place, but it didn't matter. Graham got a bee in her bonnet because she thought the winner didn't hold a candle to our entry. Fabiola reassured her that there were always politics involved, and that second place was magnifico. Fireworks filled the sky with bright bursting spirals. After watching them, we all walked slowly toward the corner of El Zócalo. Bernardo, called a voice. We all turned around. I heard your name. A man stood in front of us wearing white sports shoes and a red baseball cap. Bernardo's face lit up. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, the man looked from Bernardo to Graham to Owen and me. He seemed startled. Suddenly, he turned and ran into the crowd. I looked at Graham. It was him, Naomi, she said, her eyes still looking in the direction he had run. Before I knew it, I was running after him, following the red cap as it bobbed through the crowds. I heard Owen calling my name behind me. I dodged a hive of tourists. I bumped into a man selling balloons. Perdóneme, I said, watching the red cap. Another man held out a plastic sandwich bag in front of me, filled with cucumbers, salted with red pepper. I pushed his arm aside. I could see the red cap up ahead, going toward the square in front of the cathedral. I skirted blankets displaying hundreds of alebrijes, ran through rows of tents spilling rugs and shawls, black pottery, painted plates, knives, and leather purses. I followed the red baseball cap all the way to the corner where a woman sat under an umbrella selling fried grasshoppers. Then the cap disappeared down a side street jammed with stalls. He never looked back, not once. I stopped, breathing heavily. Why had he run? I had wanted to yell out to him, but what would I call him? Father? Santiago? I turned in a circle for one last look around. The band began to play a loud march in the gazebo in the middle of the park. The colors and sounds blurred as if the world was spinning. When it all stopped, I was alone with the fried grasshopper lady. Naomi, outlaw, you scared me to death running off like that, said Graham when I worked my way back to her. Don't you ever do that again. I didn't want him to get away. Where did he go? Why didn't he stay? Every question that came to my mind seemed to put me into a deeper stew of confusion. Graciela tried to calm me down. He was surprised, that's all. I'm sure he doesn't know why you're here. He could be frightened that you think bad of him for not coming back to get you when you were a little girl. We now know he's in town, and we can call your Aunt Teresa in the morning. What if he didn't go to Aunt Teresa's? What if he ran away for good? I said. There's nothing to be done tonight. Tomorrow, okay? Said Graciela, reaching out for my hand. As we passed in front of the cathedral, Ruben ran ahead and Owen followed. We caught up with them in front of a street vendor selling buñuelos, fried tortillas with a syrupy glaze served in a shallow terracotta bowl. Bernardo bought one for each of us, and we sat on the curb eating the crunchy sweet. But I could hardly eat. I only finished half and asked Graciela where I should put the bowl. You must throw your bowl in the courtyard, near the side of the church. Look, over there. We turned to see a man and a woman facing away from the church and throwing their bowls back over their shoulders toward a courtyard. The bowls shattered on the cobblestones and landed amongst thousands of pottery pieces. It is tradition so that good luck will follow you into the new year, said Fabiola. You must do the same. Well, we could use a little more luck, said Graham. And I know it will be right up Owen's alley. Come on, everybody. I hesitated. Naomi, come on, called Owen, his eyes pleading. I got up and followed them to the spot on the street. We flung our bowls like brides tossing bouquets, then turned to see them break in a shower of clattering shards. Owen rocked around in a crooked circle, and Reuben jumped up and down, clapping and cheering. See, Naomi? See, Naomi? Said Owen. Now we'll be lucky. I was too worn out to argue. We finally started home to Barrio Getlaco, except for the men who were headed off to celebrate their victory. Owen and Reuben pleaded to go with them, but Graham said it was no place for young boys. Before we separated, Bernardo handed me a small shopping bag. The lion, Naomi. It's for you. Spray it as soon as you get home. I smiled and took it from him, knowing he was trying to cheer me up. As we walked through the streets carrying the empty coolers, the sounds of the festival quieted behind us. The talk was about the contest. Graciela told us that the entire barrio would talk of nothing else for months. As we turned down our street, we heard the distant barking of a frantic dog. That's Lulu, said Owen. Los vecinos, said Flora, shaking her head and clicking her tongue. The poor neighbor, said Fabiola. I hope she did not bark all night. Sometimes she does not like to be left alone. We hurried down the block and into the yard, lit only by the moon. Flora struggled to unlock the door to release the whining Lulu. But before she could get it open, suddenly the jacaranda tree rustled, startling us. We all turned toward it, but it was just a spray of blossoms sprinkling down. Something didn't seem right, though, and a shiver raced up my spine. As the last jacaranda bloom drifted to the ground, I realized there wasn't a whisper of wind.